Now, who's the commander of the host? I think that's defined in verse 25. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he will even oppose the prince of princes. The prince of princes, the commander of the host, would be
Jesus.
Jesus.
In his heavenly...
The King of kings, the Lord of lords, the Lord of hosts, the Lord of the armies of Israel.
You know, this portion is giving a lot of... It's rich with sort of an imagery of heaven. And it's easy to forget that this trampling underfoot here is a theme of literal Jerusalem. Jerusalem is trodden underfoot, trampled, trodden. You see that in Isaiah, you see it everywhere, and you see it in the book of Revelation. The last 42 months is the trodding underfoot. So this is a picture of what's going on in heaven, the relationship between heaven and earth. So if, in fact, the saints are the stars that are being thrown down here, what does that suggest then? That the third part of the stars in Revelation 12 means the martyrs among. In other words, the masculine will not all die. A third die. Have you ever thought about that?
Yes.
Is that reasonable?
Yep.
So it's interesting that 2/3 of the Jewish people in the land die and are cut off, and a third survive. But talk about, you know, Jet brought that word about symmetry. It's amazing. And here's 1/3 of those that have understanding. And so, because again, there will be a woman in the wilderness, there will be refuge, there will be provision, there will be protection. Not all the saints of God are going to go down.
Yes.
It'll be a massive, massive martyrdom. But you know, if a third means a third, you're talking about a third of those who are truly born again, or at least those that have this understanding.
In the Amplified, it says that where it says it will fling truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. The Amplified adds by divine permission.
The sovereign God.
Yeah.
The enemy is on a leash. God's only allowing him to do so much. He can pull that leash anytime. God is in control. Well, so again, the point I'm trying to make here is that I don't believe the stars are talking about
Angels.
the demonic angels, but rather talking about saints of God that are trampled to the ground.
That's good.
Now we're introduced to something that's very interesting. Again, verse 11. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host, and it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. So all of a sudden you wonder, why is Brother Phil so interested in what's happening with the Temple Institute and what's happening in Jerusalem? All of a sudden the focus is going here on the Jewish daily sacrifice. The Jewish daily sacrifice, a lamb in the morning, a lamb in the evening, a lamb in the morning, every day of the year. The daily sacrifice, a continual sweet aroma going up to God on a daily basis. When in Ezra, before they rebuilt the temple, when they came back from Babylon, the first thing they did is they built the altar and began the daily sacrifice. So we're talking about a reinstitution of the daily sacrifice in Jerusalem.
You know, Phil, some may question that you might imply there that God is pleased with the sacrifice. I think that's another question, because if he was well pleased with the sacrifice, they wouldn't be about to go into great tribulation with it being violated. In other words, so
no efficacy to this sacrifice.
Be careful that we understand. We're not saying that the Jews in that sacrifice are gaining anything with God. You know,
no. They think they will be, again, because of the 613 laws. 250 of those laws require that there's a temple and an altar, and that's why they're passionate about keeping those laws. Yes.
Is that the reason you would think to do that, is to keep them under delusion, because the saints would witnessing to them, that would keep them including thinking that their daily sacrifices will keep them in peace because they're fulfilling.
Yeah, Tony, if you'll look at Isaiah chapter 28, remember today I mentioned 28, 15 and 18, the covenant with death and hell? It actually shows Gentile witnesses, those that are of another tongue, coming and like watchmen on the wall protesting to Israel with a message that comes out of their own Old Testament, here a little and there a little. and they dismiss it, and they make lies their refuge, and it says this will come upon them unsuspectingly, but it's not because they were not warned. They were warned, and when it comes, it says they'll be trodden underfoot, the very language we have here. You see what I mean? So they'll be warned that they've made, you just entered into a league with death and hell. You're trusting in your worst, enemy. And so they will have been warned, but they will dismiss it and discount it.
And let me throw this out. If you were a Christian living in the first century, before the destruction of the temple, this was still going on till 70 A.D. Daily in the temple, they were the early disciples. Mm-hmm. The smoke was still going up. The lambs were still being slaughtered. And daily in the temple they were preaching. But I can imagine what the message was.
Jesus the fulfillment.
Jesus was the Lamb of God that took away the sin of the world. But again, for 40 years, that continued in the early church. This was going on. So does this make our preaching any less valid, or any the fact that this will be going on? Is it going to be?
No, there's no discrepancy.
It's not going to affect our witness at all. Well, there's new theories. I guess the most interesting new theory, if I can tell you what I've learned, is that scientists that have gone underneath the Temple Mount and done laser surveying, they've actually located what was once the eastern gate, this is going way down, and the western gate, and they've determined, according to one report that I read, that the Dome of the Rock is actually sitting a little bit south to where the temple once stood. And remember, the temple, where it stood, there was the temple, the Holy of Holies, and then there was the outer court, and then there was a huge outer court that was called the Court of the Gentiles. The new theory is that the Dome of the Rock is actually sitting in what used to be the Court of the Gentiles. So one of the arguments now is the Dome of the Rock doesn't have to be technically and legally taken down. Gentiles are allowed to be in that court. Build the temple right next to the Dome of the Rock. A compromise situation. Now, I tell you, when I was in Israel in November, I went to Hebron and visited Abraham's tomb. It's an incredible place to visit. And you go into the edifice that Herod built 30 years before Christ. Herod, the same one that built the Temple Mount and enlarged the temple, built this edifice over the cave Machpelah that Abraham purchased when Sarah died. When you go into the building, there's 3 huge stones. One says Abraham, one says Isaac, one says Jacob. Incredible to be there. It's the cave of the patriarchs. Over on this side, there's Sarah, Leah, and Rebecca, the matriarch. I mean, it is a very, very special place to visit. And I had visited in '95, but when I went back this time, last year, I noticed that something was different. They had erected a wall right down the middle. The Israeli security defense forces had erected a wall right down the middle, and they had Abraham's tomb, the huge rock. It's 12 foot long, 6 foot wide, 5 foot tall, huge stone, weighs several hundred tons, or several dozens of tons. They had that moved right in the middle of that wall to where half of it was protruding out on the Jewish side, and the other half on the Arab side. Arabs, he's their father too. So now they've established a compromise situation. The Jews come in and worship on this side. There's a wall. They can come and touch Abraham's tomb. And the Arabs on the other side come and touch Abraham's tomb. The wall goes up 20 feet. And so what they've done, they've compromised for the sake of peace there at Abraham's tomb in Hebron. When I looked at that, the thought just came to me, I bet this is what they're going to do on the Temple Mount. They're going to build a wall. Gentiles are allowed there in that outer court, but now the new laser surveying, the ancient temple was a little bit to the north of that. Just one theory, and they're actually discussing these in peace negotiations now.
A good illustration of the middle wall of partition.
Yeah, the middle wall of partition.
Yeah, I think you just solved the problem here. You covertly talked Muslims into allowing you to set up this temple.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when you gain the trust, you gather many, probably millions of Jews from all over the world will migrate there, and you'll satisfy their,
Right.
you can get them all here with what not quickly.
Especially the Orthodox. They'll be
Yeah.
That
Especially.
That is a point. I think you really solved something there, for this problem. But I'm more ignorant than I ever realized on this. I thought the sacrifices were stopped. When the Holy of Holies was rent, did they patch that up and they just continue like nothing happened?
Yeah, the sacrifices didn't stop till 70 AD.
So they're actually
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so how can I not know it all those years?
Yeah.
Yes, Peter.
Well, I recently was on a Jewish website looking into that, and you mentioned a number of laws that require sacrifice. They're not all atoning sacrifice.
Right.
And what they're saying is that in America, for example, a lot of the Jews in America don't even think they need to have a temple. But in Israel, you have different groups of Jews there. They all believe that they need to have a temple rebuilt. They don't all agree that you have to have that atoning sacrifice. But they'll have these other altars outside of what are within the Holy of Holies, where they'll offer sacrifices, which are other kinds of offerings, like peace offerings and things like that. And they're thinking that they can do that rather quickly. That could happen actually fairly soon. Okay, and they don't even have to have the inner sanctuary of the temple built to do that.
That's right.
That's right. We discussed
You made
that.
that point earlier, yeah. That's right.
Yeah, we discussed that actually our first evening here, that the altar has been constructed, the prototype, and in fact I brought some articles about it. I'll distribute tomorrow, the stone altar project. The altar has been built. It's at Kibbutz Jericho. It's ready to be moved to the Temple Mount.
Yeah. Is that when you start the countdown? Is when the first sacrifice done? I mean, is that when you would begin counting?
No, the countdown starts when this league is made with him. Then some months, there's a case that can be made that some months after that, the 2,300 days actually include from the inception or beginning of the sacrifice all the way to the end. So coming back from the end, 2,300 days, which brings you well short of the full 7 years. So there's a covenant with death and hell, this league with this man, and then some months later, the sacrifice begins. But you do not need a fully constructed temple, because the Jews themselves will tell you that in history, as soon as they returned from Babylon, before they ever built the temple, they immediately started sacrifices. The only thing we have to have before the sacrifice is the false covenant, the league.
Yes.
Okay.
And some also, just looking at the economics of travel and tourism in Israel, some have speculated that there's more to this peace agreement than just religious matters, that you can imagine the Jews, if they begin to rebuild the temple, you think tourism is not going to go crazy? Yeah. And that the cameras are going to be on there, and every step of every construction piece that's put together is going to draw millions of tourists. Let's go and see how they're coming on the temple.